So I don't know about you, but as I read this story, I assume that Simeon is of advanced age. It might be because his story is associated with Anna's story, and it is said here that she is 84 years old, which is well aged in any century, old enough to have seen hopes and fears come and go and return again. Maybe it's because he is described as righteous and devout. These terms in society's imagination apply best to people with some age on them, some seasoning, some gracefulness that only comes with long practice. Young people who are serious about religion could be described as enthusiastic, and it may be necessary to wait to see how they ripen. Some grow deep and wise. Some just get loud. Simeon sounds deep and wise. Maybe we think that Simeon is old because Mary lets him take the baby from her. Not many mothers are going to hand over their newborn to some random young man who might have never held a baby before. Certainly not while he's standing up. He would have to sit down and she would give him the baby and supervise very carefully. But an old man who might be a grandfather with lots of experience, maybe she would let such a person hold her baby. Maybe. But maybe this is why we assume Simeon is old enough for Mary to trust him. But what matters about Simeon, I think, is that he is described as looking forward. He was waiting with eager longing for Christ. This kind of waiting carries the metaphoric hint of being stretched tight, stretched even to the breaking point, like a string on a guitar, tightened and tightened and tightened, until finally it's about to snap. Simeon, the storyteller, informs us, is stretched tight. If he were a young man, he would be about to snap. But thank goodness he has learned the lessons about waiting that only a person of advanced years can learn. They wait. They feel the tension, perhaps more powerfully than young people even can, because they have waited so often and for so long. For some essential things, they have waited longer than I have been alive. In my experience, this does not make them complacent. It does not make them cease to hope. If anything, people who have experienced waiting, they wait with a settled instance that stuns me. Listen to Isaiah 25:9. It will be said in that day, "This is our God. We have waited for him." I hear an 80-year-old's voice when I read that verse, a voice that has waited for the end of labor and delivery, for children to finally find their balance in life, for wars to end, and for safety to return. What matters, especially in this story, is that Simeon is not alone in his waiting. Anna, a prophet, is waiting with him. And she speaks about the baby to all those who are also waiting. And there seems to be a great many of them gathered here in the temple. The older I get, the more I find myself to be waiting. When I was younger, I waited for the end of the semester in order to graduate from this school or that one. I waited to find a job, to find a better apartment. All of these things were just a matter of time, and I knew it. Waiting was something you could put on a calendar, more or less. There was a timeline to it. But waiting is more complicated these days. I have friends who are waiting to be deployed, some of them for a second or third time. I am waiting with them, and I wait for them to return. I find myself feeling the tension of generations of mothers and fathers who waited for any of this to make any real sense. I am waiting with friends facing difficult diagnoses, waiting for remissions or for cures or for aggressive disease processes to work themselves out. I suppose that I used to think that these separate hopes exclude each other. But even with limited experience with waiting has taught me that even cures can turn into end-stage disease with a rapidity that leaves us dizzy and disoriented. And I have learned that it can go the other way as well. Waiting is complicated. These days, and this is true even before we add in the waiting we all do for a day when we will find the political will and the fiscal sanity that will allow us to treat medical care for all of us as a cultural priority. Waiting is very complicated. Given Anna's age and Simeon's probable age, neither of the central characters in this scene would have been around to see how Jesus' story worked itself out. Neither would have seen Rome condemn him to death. Neither would have witnessed the torture that killed him. Before we leap to the resurrection, imagine what Anna or Simeon would have said if they had lived long enough to stand at the foot of the cross and watch. What would they have said then about the consolation of Israel or the redemption of Jerusalem? Because if they had been there, they would have had to wait. They would have had to wait 3 days not knowing that they were waiting, but knowing that their Savior, the longed-for hope that they had waited for, was gone. We know the story, and yet we jump over the 3-day wait because it's just too unbearable. We rush to the empty tomb to be assured that Jesus is not there. Waiting is complicated. But may you be sent out in peace, despite the fact that we, like Simeon, have had our eyes, with our very own eyes, have seen God's salvation.